4-track is an instrument that emulates a 4-track tape machine in an extended sense. Like my other devices, Tape and Tape Multi, this device was inspired by the many great artists who have published works of acousmatic and electroacoustic music since the musique concrète era. Here the focus is once again on the creative and unconventional use of the functions. Compared to the two devices mentioned above, however, this device works a bit differently in terms of handling. The device does not react to MIDI notes, but is activated and deactivated exclusively via the on-off switch. However, the individual sound elements that are generated during the playback process can be handled very flexibly. Some modules within the device have an extra window to display certain functions. Basically, 4-track consists of 4 playback devices which can be used to play and loop 4 different samples. To load the samples, the buffer display should be opened first. Each buffer can be loaded individually by pressing the Add button in order to load the samples one after the other from left to right. Another very practical way is to directly load a group of samples that are in a folder with the Load button. The first 4 samples of the folder appear first. With the number box you can always define groups of 4 samples, where the number always means the first of 4 consecutive samples. 1 means sample 1 to 4, 2 would be sample 2 to 5, 3 would be sample 3 to 6, and so on. Furthermore, the samples can be exchanged via the list window. The display at the top always shows which sampler will be loaded next. In addition, the Randomize button can be used to assign randomly selected samples from the folder to the samplers in any order. By double-clicking, the randomization process can happen continuously within a set time. Clicking again stops the procedure. By clicking on the X button, all modules can be reset to the default settings, which in this case means that all buffers are cleared. In the sample editor windows, individual loops can now be selected with the mouse. If required, it is also possible to zoom into the window. When opened for the first time, the entire content is automatically selected for playback. If you want to go back to the entire content selection after an individual selection, simply press the All button. This button, like all the other buttons on the left side of the window, has a global effect on all 4 editors. Pressing the Norm button normalizes the sample content of each of the 4 samplers. Note that this command does not affect the sample on the hard disk, but it cannot be undone with respect to the contents of the device's buffer. Also, the Crop command, which trims the respective loop selection to the desired size, is a destructive command with respect to the loaded sample. If the sample has to be restored, it can simply be loaded again directly from the hard disk into the corresponding buffer via drag and drop. Selecting a loop can also be done randomly. For this, the Random button and the Select module must be pressed. The selection can be automated, again with a double click on the button. The loop length and the auto trigger frequency can be set separately. Furthermore, you can crossfade from one loop selection to the next and set the crossfade time. The Fade knob allows a smoother fade in and out of the loop, cleaning up clicks that may have been caused by discontinuities. The Delay control defines the evenly scaled offset for each player in relation to the loop length. Note that I just loaded the same sample in all 4 samplers to demonstrate the effect more clearly. By changing the length parameter in the Select section, the scaling can be controlled independently from the actual loop length. Manipulating the speed plays an important role in 4-track. In each player, the individual sample can be played in 2 different speeds, so that you can have not only 4 but up to 8 different playback situations. The main speed is first set with a speed slider. Here 1 means the original speed, 2 would be twice as fast and thus an octave higher, 0.5 means half speed and an octave lower, and so on. Negative values mean that the samples are played backwards with the corresponding speed. The factor knob sets another speed that is relative to the main knob and also plays the samples back. If the factor is set to 1, the sample would play at exactly the same speed as set by the speed knob. So you don't really hear that there are two different playback situations. If you increase or decrease the factor even slightly, you will quickly notice the difference. An interesting setting is the default setting where the factor is -1. So the sample is technically being played back at the same speed, but it will be played forward and backward at the same time. If you now change the main speed with the speed knob, the ratio of both playback speeds remains the same. While these settings affect all 4 samplers globally, the speeds can also be set individually. Again, the speed settings apply in the positive and negative range in terms of direction and pitch. The speed settings can be randomized individually. The time for a process cycle can be set. By double-clicking, the randomization process can be done continuously. Furthermore, for each of the 4 samplers, an individual range can be defined within which changes in the speed should proceed, which can be reset just as easily. Once the different samples have been changed in speed, they will most likely be out of sync when merging back to the original speed. This can be corrected by a quick click on the sync button. But if you want to achieve this phase effect without changing the pitches first, you can simply click on the phase button. The played samples can be enriched by frequency and amplitude modulation with typical vibrato and tremolo effects. There are many possibilities, from a light typical flutter or wow effect of a tape or small volume differences up to extreme settings. In addition, this device also makes use of the multi-channel feature with its deviate feature for the frequency settings. The possible settings serve up to 4 voices and can be explained best with an example. If the base frequency is set to 2 Hz and the deviate value is increased, all 4 values in the random setting get deviations, which in this case are slightly above and below 2 Hz. The higher the deviate value, the greater the deviations can be in both directions. In absolute mode, the deviate value is added to the remaining base frequency and will be increased for each voice, so that in the maximum setting the values 2 Hz, 3 Hz, 4 Hz and 5 Hz would result. In relative mode, the remaining base frequency is multiplied by the deviate value and will be increased by a multiple for each voice, so that the values 2 Hz, 4 Hz, 6 Hz and 8 Hz would result in the maximum setting. In a separate display window, the 8 different tracks resulting from the 4 sample players, each with 2 different playback speeds, can be individually controlled and automated with regard to their level. When manual mode is selected, the levels of the individual tracks can be changed manually using the multi-slider. In addition, the sliders can be mapped and operated with a MIDI controller. In auto mode, the sliders can be randomized by pressing the random button. Here again, the time of the process cycle can be defined. If you want to end a process cycle prematurely, you can do this by clicking on the stop button. Again, a double click on the random button achieves the continuous process. The pan modulation can also be operated via a separate editor window. Here again, you can choose between an automated and a manual modulation setting. There are various combination options whereby spatial distribution can be determined in different ways. Inside, each loop and its counterpart, which means the same loop but with a different speed of each individual playback buffer, can be panned individually to arbitrary positions. So 8 different tracks can be controlled individually. Complete. The complete contents, that means the loop and its counterpart together, of the 4 playback buffers will be panned individually to arbitrary positions, so only 4 different tracks will be controlled. These first 2 modes can be automated with the usual frequency parameter, and again by double-clicking the randomization process can happen continuously and the time of a process cycle can be determined. The counterpart setting is especially interesting in auto mode. Here the loops and their counterparts will be panned against each other. A loop being panned to the very left and its counterpart being panned to the very right will change the respective side. It is possible to provide the modulation speed with some deviate functions. These work in the same way as the vibrato and tremolo frequency modulations.